The soft announcement of final boarding echoed through the crowded airport terminal, prompting a gentle shift in the restless sea of travelers. Among them, Naomi Carter stood out not because of anything she wore, but because of the calm resilience etched into her features. Dressed in a clean but modest cream blouse and tailored slacks, she could have passed for a teacher, a social worker, or just another working mom, except she wasn't. She was the CEO of Elevate Airlines, flying home from an unpublicized tour of one of the company's struggling East African branches. Cradling her daughter's hand, Naomi moved with the kind of grace that made people assume she'd never been in a rush in her life. 7-year-old Ava, with her cornrows neat and her small bunny clutched tightly to her chest, looked up at her mother with quiet awe. She didn't fully understand her mother's job, but she knew her mom made big decisions, flew to faraway places, and always came back stronger than when she left. Their journey that day wasn't intended to draw attention. Naomi had purposefully booked a commercial flight home rather than use the executive jet, something she did often to quietly evaluate the customer experience without alerting anyone. She didn't wear a name tag or a badge. She didn't even carry the high-end leather briefcase that had been a gift from the board. What she carried instead was humility, a sense of mission, and a child who trusted her completely. At the boarding gate, nothing seemed amiss. Naomi checked in smoothly, received her first-class boarding pass, seat 1A, and proceeded down the jet bridge with Ava, who was wide-eyed at the sight of the massive plane. She took a moment to smile at the crew greeting passengers at the entrance. No one recognized her. Inside the aircraft, the air was cool and quiet, a contrast to the chaos outside. Naomi led Ava down the short aisle to the first row. But when they reached seat 1A, Naomi paused. A tall man in an expensive pinstripe suit was already seated, flipping through a glossy magazine. His legs were stretched out, and his phone lay charging beside a half-drunk glass of champagne. He didn't even glance up. Naomi looked at her boarding pass again and then at the seat number. There was no mistake. Before she could speak or wave for assistance, a flight attendant appeared. Rachel, mid-40s, meticulously groomed, with a no-nonsense demeanor honed from years in the air. She wore the Elevate Airlines uniform crisply, though her expression hinted at weariness and the practiced disinterest of someone used to judging situations quickly and moving on. Rachel took one look at Naomi. Her plain clothes, economy style, travel bag, and child in tow, and immediately made an assumption. Without asking questions or checking the manifest, she tilted her head sympathetically and motioned for Naomi to step aside. There had been a booking glitch, Rachel explained. These things happened. She apologized for the inconvenience and offered to reseat Naomi and her daughter in economy until the matter could be sorted. Naomi blinked, surprised by the swift dismissal. She handed over her boarding pass again, wordlessly. Rachel scanned. It looked confused for a moment, then seemed to recalibrate her smile, still soft but now firm with finality. "Sometimes passengers get bumped," she said, again offering no real explanation and refusing to escalate the situation. The businessman occupying 1A didn't look up once. Naomi remained quiet. She didn't argue. Instead, she took Ava's hand, smiled gently at her, and nodded. They were guided to the back, seat 27C and 27D, right beside the lavatory, where the smell of disinfectant and the mechanical clunk of the toilet echoed regularly. Ava sat down, her bunny in her lap. She looked confused but didn't complain. Naomi gave her a juice box from her bag and gently brushed a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. Naomi herself sat back and closed her eyes. She didn't need to make a scene. She never did. Power, she had learned long ago, wasn't in raising your voice. It was in knowing exactly when to use your silence like a scalpel. The flight lifted into the sky. Business class bustled with soft clinks of champagne glasses and murmured conversations. Back in economy, Naomi thought about her upcoming board meeting, the restructuring plan, and the hiring freeze she had just reversed in Kenya. Every decision she made trickled down into the lives of people she would never meet, employees, passengers, families, and today one of those people had judged her based on the color of her skin and the simplicity of her appearance. Rachel, meanwhile, moved efficiently through the cabin. She prided herself on being excellent at her job. What she hadn't realized yet was that today she had made a critical misstep, one that would be remembered far beyond this flight. Because Naomi Carter was not just any mother. She was the woman whose signature authorized Rachel's paycheck. The aircraft glided through the clouds en route to New York's JFK International Airport. Above the Atlantic, as passengers slipped into naps and in-flight movies played silently, Naomi Carter sat wide awake in seat 27C. The hum of the engines masked her thoughts, but her stillness spoke volumes. The flight attendant's mistake, and the quiet disrespect of a system she had tried to reform from the top, lingered like stale air. Naomi had made it her mission to erase classist attitudes within Elevate Airlines. But culture was harder to redesign than a logo. Policies could be rewritten, yet behavior was a slower beast. This wasn't the first time she had experienced judgment wrapped in courtesy. She had built her career defying such moments. But it was the first time it happened while flying her own airline, ticketed in her rightful seat. Ava rested beside her, face tucked against her mother's side, unaware of the subtle cruelty her mother had endured. Naomi had shielded her from it all. There were no tears, no anger. She had grown immune to front-row dismissal. What disturbed her more was the ease with which assumptions were made, even in the sky. 2 rows up, Rachel poured another glass of white wine for the suited man in 1A. Her shift was winding down, her manner relaxed now that the seating issue had been handled, so she thought. She had seen it as a minor hiccup, but that moment at the front of the plane had exposed more than a clerical error. It had exposed how her lens was still fogged with unconscious bias. As the plane began its descent, cabin lights flickered on and trays clicked shut. Naomi helped Ava put her shoes back on and packed their belongings quietly. A few passengers in nearby rows had noticed the switch earlier. A young couple in row 28 had looked confused when Naomi was walked past them earlier, holding a first-class boarding pass. But no one had said a word. That was how it always went. People saw, people stayed silent. The wheels touched down with a soft screech. The cabin burst into motion. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead bins swung open, and the artificial order of the aircraft dissolved into the human chaos of arrival. Rachel stood at the front again, thanking passengers as they exited row by row. Her smile was automatic, her eyes already tired of the ritual. She barely looked at faces anymore until Naomi and Ava reached her at the front of the plane. It took Rachel a moment to register them. The mother with the quiet grace, the little girl with the bunny, the woman whose ticket had said 1A. There was a flicker of recognition, but no apology came. Rachel had already moved on. Naomi nodded politely, her face unreadable, and stepped off the aircraft. But her silence was not the end. It was the breath before a decision. Inside the terminal, Naomi paused briefly, reached into her tote bag, and pulled out a slim leather folio. From it, she removed a secure phone, one used only for executive matters, and typed a single message. Within the hour, the VP of Customer Operations, the Director of Staff Ethics, and the Chief of HR would receive it. The subject line was simple. Flight 2975, Elevate Airlines, Incident, Passenger 1A. She didn't demand punishment. She didn't name names. She simply described the sequence of actions with the clinical precision of a leader who expected better, not just for herself, but for every passenger who might not have the title to defend themselves. At the arrivals hall, Naomi found the black sedan waiting to pick her up. The driver, assigned to her only on domestic legs, greeted her by name. She helped Ava into the back seat and sat beside her, watching as the city skyline loomed in the distance. Back at corporate headquarters, the E, next day, Rachel's morning began as always, signing in through the crew portal, checking route assignments, sipping her lukewarm coffee. But by noon, she was summoned to the employee conference room where a senior ethics officer sat waiting. Rachel entered confused but confident. It was only when the officer opened his folder and placed a printout of a formal report before her that the cracks began to form. The first line read, "Filed by Naomi Carter, CEO." The color drained from Rachel's face. The woman from 27C. The mother with the quiet dignity. The passenger she dismissed without question. Rachel sat silently, her past actions replaying in her mind like turbulence she never anticipated. No raised voice, no confrontation, just truth, delivered in the stillness of leadership. Back in her corner office, Naomi didn't follow up. She didn't need to. The message had been sent, not just to Rachel, but to a culture that still believed worth wore expensive shoes and privilege carried platinum cards. Naomi looked out the window at the skyline, her reflection faint in the glass. Ava's drawing from preschool hung beside her desk, an airplane with a heart in the clouds. It reminded her of why she started. Not to punish, not to prove, but to reshape what it meant to lead. And from that day on, policies were not just updated. They were felt. 2 weeks after the flight, a quiet tremor spread across Elevate Airlines. Corporate offices. It didn't come from a public scandal or viral footage. There were no angry hashtags, no media leaks. The power of the moment lay in its silence. How one decision made in a cabin became the lever that moved an entire system. Naomi Carter had issued no public statement, but internally her report triggered what employees had only whispered about before, the launch of a full internal culture audit. The term alone sent ripples of nervous energy through departments that had long operated without accountability. HR scheduled interviews. Diversity consultants were hired. Employees received anonymous surveys that asked uncomfortable questions. How often had they judged a passenger by appearance? How often had assumptions gone unchallenged? In crew lounges, the atmosphere grew tense. Rachel, the flight attendant who had dismissed Naomi that day, was not suspended. Naomi had never asked for retribution, but Rachel was reassigned. Her new route was less glamorous, a domestic loop between mid-sized cities with longer layovers and tighter crew restrictions. It wasn't punishment, it was reflection time. Her supervisor, after reviewing the audit findings, offered her coaching sessions, an opportunity to rebuild trust through understanding, not discipline. Rachel accepted them, begrudgingly at first. But as the sessions unfolded, a deeper layer of her own life peeled back. She had grown up in a small Ohio town where every passenger who looked important had a certain image. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her father rarely made it to school meetings. For years, Rachel believed she had climbed out of that shadow by presenting herself as someone who always knew best. But in doing so, she had quietly turned into a gatekeeper of assumptions. She had never considered that someone could be a CEO in flats and a cardigan, holding a juice box for their child. At corporate, Naomi watched the progress with measured patience. She didn't want apologies or symbolic gestures. She wanted policies that protected dignity, not just convenience. Her leadership team, some of whom were still adjusting to her quiet authority, soon realized that she led not by presence, but by outcome. A month after the incident, Naomi instituted what she called perspective flights. Every senior manager, from finance to marketing, was required to fly anonymously on a commercial route once a quarter. No special tags, no pre-alerted crew, just them, a ticket, and the experience every customer faced. Resistance came first from those who felt such tasks were beneath them. But when the first VP returned from a flight where they were seated next to a nervous grandmother struggling with her carry-on and ignored by staff, things began to change. They began to see the airline not from spreadsheets, but from the aisle seat in row 31. Meanwhile, in Naomi's personal world, Ava's school held a career day. Most parents arrived in uniforms, scrubs, or suits. Naomi wore the same outfit she wore on that flight, clean, modest, unremarkable. She spoke to the children about flight paths, air pressure, and the importance of listening, really listening, to those who seem invisible. She didn't tell them her title, only that she worked for an airline and that one day they could too, if they led with kindness. The principal, only later recognizing Naomi from a feature in Forbes, called to apologize for introducing her so casually. Naomi smiled and told her not to worry. That was the point. In quiet meetings with the board, Naomi revealed the ripple effects from that one flight. The audit had revealed something deeper than a faulty booking system. It exposed a disconnect between mission statements and frontline behavior. It reminded them that equity could not be archived in policy documents. It had to live in every seat, every boarding pass, every decision. One board member asked if she planned to discipline more staff. Naomi shook her head. Her focus was not on disciplining the few, but on transforming the many. The airline's internal motto, once a corporate cliché, elevate every experience, took on new meaning. Posters were redesigned. Training programs were rewritten. Flight crews began sharing stories of moments when they stopped and reconsidered their first judgment. One new attendant noticed a woman crying silently over a closed laptop and offered tissues without questions. Another rerouted a gate check request for a passenger with a visible leg brace. These were small acts, but they became the new currency of culture. And through it all, Naomi never raised her voice. She never took the stage. She simply remained present. Her office remained unchanged, walls still bare except for Ava's latest drawing, a woman flying an airplane surrounded by clouds shaped like hearts. Naomi pinned it beside the first one. Because change wasn't just in the air, it was now grounded, system-wide. Winter crept into the city with a sharp wind and gray skies that never quite cleared. At Elevate Airline's global headquarters, the glass-paneled tower reflected the cold skyline, but inside, something warmer was taking root. Naomi Carter, now 6 months into her tenure as CEO, had seen the transformation unfold in ripples. Small shifts at first, then waves. She had not replaced every executive, nor had she rebranded the airline with lofty slogans. Instead, she had quietly recentered the company on what she believed it had lost: the power of respect without performance. The flight that changed it all, Flight 2975, was no longer spoken of by name, but its lesson had embedded itself in every cabin, every gate, every uniform. Rachel, the flight attendant who once misjudged Naomi in Seat 1A, had completed her coaching program and returned to international routes. But she wasn't the same. On a flight to Cape Town, she helped a disabled artist stow his painting kit and offered him her own extra blanket. On another to Vancouver, she stepped in when a junior attendant tried to redirect an elderly Sikh man from business class. Her instinct had changed, not because of a rulebook, but because she had seen what could be lost when assumptions led the way. Meanwhile, Naomi had become more visible, not through press interviews or boardroom speeches, but through presence. She showed up at unexpected places, maintenance facilities in rural Texas, baggage claim in Detroit, and at a crew member's funeral when no other executive had time. Her name was often unknown to those she met, but her impact never was. In a rare company-wide video, Naomi addressed her 40,000 employees without makeup, seated casually in the break room of a regional terminal in Atlanta. She spoke not of quarterly growth, but of moments. Moments when someone was seen, heard, believed. In the video was played at every station. In silence, crews watched her speak of dignity as if it were a flight path, something that required constant navigation and vigilance. What happened after surprised even her. Complaints dropped, not because passengers became easier, but because staff became more aware. Not perfect, airlines were too chaotic for perfection, but better, more human, more present. Training protocols were updated. Uniform guidelines relaxed slightly to account for cultural attire. Language and announcements shifted subtly from corporate detachment to warmth. Naomi initiated a new program called the 1A Pledge. Any crew member who made a visible act of dignity beyond expectation, particularly toward travelers who seemed overlooked, could be nominated by passengers. Monthly, the stories were shared internally. The rewards were never monetary. They were handwritten letters from Naomi herself. One of the first honorees was a ground staff member in Minneapolis who walked a foster child to her connecting gate when the system flagged her as unaccompanied. He sat with her, offered her gum, and made her laugh. She wrote on her nomination card, "He made me feel like I mattered." It was a reminder to everyone that leadership was not a title. It was a decision. Back in Naomi's world, Ava turned 8. She had grown into a curious, outspoken child who asked big questions and drew bigger dreams. For her birthday, she requested to visit the airport, not for the flights, but to see the people who made the sky safe. Naomi arranged it quietly. A walk-through with her daughter, who waved at pilots and asked gate agents about their radios. She watched Ava absorb it all, not the privilege, but the process. The invisible web of humanity that made flight possible. Later, in the car ride home, Ava asked her mother if she would ever sit in that big chair again, referring to seat 1A. Naomi smiled without answering. In truth, she hadn't taken 1A again since the incident. Not out of spite, but because she had redefined what elevation meant to her. Elevation was not in where you sat. It was in how you treated the person next to you, whether you shared an armrest in row 32 or a leather recliner up front. But one day, she would return to that seat. And when she did, it wouldn't be to reclaim it. It would be to sit beside someone else who might need the space to breathe, to be seen, to matter. Because in the end, the legacy Naomi Carter would leave at Elevate Airlines would not be her record, profits, or her historic title. It would be the memory of a woman in seat 27C who changed the entire altitude of a company without ever needing to raise her voice.